This is WAB's Week in Review. I'm Alex Helmick, managing editor of WAB News. And on this show, we take a look back at the last couple of days and stories from your WAB News team. Coming up on the show, researchers are looking into whether a tiny plant could be a moneymaker for Georgia farmers.
Yeah, if farmers can grow saffron, if they can diversify their farm, it can be an alternative source of income.
That's coming up in about 10 minutes. But we start with President Donald Trump signing the Laken Riley Act into federal law, surrounded by the late Georgia nursing student's family this week. WABE's Emily Wu Pearson had more about the first law Trump signed in his second term.
A Venezuelan migrant who entered the U.S. illegally murdered the 22-year-old last year. The law requires Immigration and Customs Enforcement to detain migrants accused of theft, shoplifting, burglary, assaulting a police officer, or crimes that kill or seriously injure someone. Riley's mom, Allison Phillips, thanked Trump at the ceremony.
There's no amount of change that will ever bring back our precious Laken. Our hope moving forward is that her life saves lives.
Republican Mike Collins from Georgia sponsored the bill that passed with bipartisan support in the House, including all Georgia Republicans, with Lucy McBath joining them. Senators John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock also voted yes on the bill. Emily Wu Pearson, WABE News.
Well, Democrats in the state legislature are making another attempt to extend health coverage to more Georgians under Medicaid, and this time 4 Republicans have already signed on. But Georgia Governor Brian Kemp has been clear he will not back fully expanding Medicaid. WABE health reporter Jess Mador and politics reporter Sam Greenglass had this.
Democrats call the plan Peach Care Plus. It would expand Medicaid to cover hundreds of thousands of Georgians. But unlike nearly all of the other 40 states that have already expanded Medicaid to more low-income adults, Georgia would do something different. Using mostly federal funds, the state would pay for plans on the private market. Laura Colbert is with Georgians for a Healthy Future.
This is the first bill by Republican co-sponsors that would also fully close Georgia's coverage gap.
Colbert says Peach Care Plus would cover more people than Georgia Pathways, the state's more limited Medicaid expansion program with a work requirement. But Kemp says he's committed to Pathways even though enrollment has been sluggish.
So what makes Democrats and some Republicans think Kemp's position could change? Senator Russ Goodman, like other GOP co-sponsors, represents a rural district where hospitals have struggled to stay open. He says the one near his farm proved critical when his son nearly got electrocuted.
You know, if that rural hospital hadn't have been there, I don't know that my son would be here today. It's something that I think about often when we have these discussions.
Goodman says he wants to have the debate about expansion, even if he's not sure he'd ultimately vote yes. Democrats like House Minority Leader Carolyn Hughley hope they can convince enough Republicans.
Under the Gold Dome, a no might mean not now. And windows are never really closed.
But that window may not really swing open again until Kemp has left the building. I'm Sam Greenglass.
And I'm Jess Mador, WABE News.
Half of the state's 180 school districts have started the legal process to opt out of the Homestead Exemption law voters recently approved. That's according to a survey from the Georgia School Superintendents Association. WAB's Melissa Fado reported those districts include some in Metro Atlanta, DeKalb, Cobb, Gwinnett, and Atlanta Public Schools.
Georgians voted in November to cap how much of a home's increase in value can be taxed, but the law allows school districts to opt out by March 1st. That's because limiting tax revenue translates to big losses for local schools. Gwinnett says it could lose $35 million a year, and Cobb says it could lose $43 million annually. Local governments also have the option to opt out, but they can increase sales tax by 1% to make up for the loss, which school districts can't. Almost 2 in 3 Georgians voted yes on the Homestead Exemption. By law, school districts have to hold 3 public hearings before a decision is made. Melissa Fato, WABE News.
Note of disclosure, WABE's license is held by Atlanta Public Schools. Well, a national egg shortage was on the minds of poultry industry professionals in Atlanta for the annual expo this week. It came amid bird flu outbreaks across the country, including at a commercial facility here in Georgia. WABE's Marlon Hyde had more.
Thousands of people watch live demonstrations and visit poultry-themed booths for the International Production and Processing Expo. Tom Dixon works with Highline, an Iowa-based company that sells commercial and industrial laying chickens.
I mean, my concern is in the industry and looking all around the world is that as prices go up, it will actually hurt consumption.
According to the American Egg Board, the country has lost nearly 50 million laying hens in the past year due to highly pathogenic avian influenza, also known as HPAI or bird flu. But the demand for eggs is holding strong, and with a tighter supply, that's leading to higher prices on store shelves. Industry leaders say it's going to take a sustained period with no new bird flu detections on egg farms to stabilize supply. Marlon Hyde, WABE News.
And Georgia businesses are bracing as avian flu and high demand are driving up the price of eggs and chicken, which continue to soar. We asked some local restaurants, bakeries, and business owners about it.
People love eating eggs on a breakfast daily basis. It's like a $6 the small quart of eggs, which is make everything hard on the small business owners.
As a business owner, you have to take the hit on the eggs, especially when eggs make up 90% of the ingredients in the bakery.
Eggs are an essential part to this operation. So the prices being, where they're at, and if they continue to go up, naturally it's going to affect me on the bottom line. And so I may have to look at raising my prices.
That was Moody Al-Bawab, Karima Goodman, and Keith Kusnick. Well, a century ago, South Downtown was Atlanta's front door, but people and businesses moved away, leaving it a shell of what it once was. Now, ahead of the 2026 World Cup, there's a plan to bring it back, which centers around technology and redevelopment. WAB's Julian Virgin explained how investors and legacy businesses are working to not just revitalize the community, but also convince folks to come back.
I love this view right here. You got ultra-modern Mercedes-Benz right in front of you. You got new skyscraper coming up from Centennial Yards.
David Cummings is the CEO of Atlanta Ventures, the company that's redeveloping this neighborhood.
Welcome to the new Atlanta Tech Village.
Cummings calls the hub for tech entrepreneurs the anchor of the community. Now, he says the goal is
bringing the entrepreneurs, the small business owners, and then creating housing. Taking these beautiful old department stores, these old bank operation centers, and turning them into loft apartments.
Atlanta Ventures aims to turn 10 city blocks and more than 50 buildings into an innovation district for live, work, and play. Cummings says his company is working with the city on affordable housing measures. No details are available yet, but he says there are no residential buildings here. They're all for commercial use, like Friedman Shoes, who's called this neighborhood home for a long time.
1929, 95 years.
That's third-generation store president Brett Taliber. He remembers what this neighborhood used to be.
People walking around, businesses open, 4 or 5 restaurants on the street, Ollie's trolley cart on the corner. I mean, it was an active neighborhood.
But as time went on, things changed. Activity slowed and customers followed.
One business after another started falling, and the area became empty.
Aziz Falaz owns Sunrise Fragrance. He's been in the neighborhood since 2000 and says with the emptiness came crime, drug, and other issues.
Before, you couldn't even walk down a Broad Street without having to, walk over someone or, put a mask on because you couldn't bear the smell of the human waste.
In 2016, a German real estate company began buying property, testing viability, and investing into the cleanup of the neighborhood. Atlanta Ventures has since acquired the assets from the real estate firm and has continued efforts to revitalize the community by including legacy businesses and people like Jay Slaughter, who works at a local clothing store.
So anytime you are redeveloping and not displacing the inhabitants, we count it a win-win.
Freedman's president, Brett Taliber, says his shoe store is moving, but that's by choice. He sold his family's 37,000 square foot building to Atlanta Ventures and by year's end, we'll be renting a smaller one in the same area.
And we're hunkering down and want to be part of the growth and part of the new spirit and part of the revitalization, part of the phoenix of downtown.
According to the Central Atlanta Progress, downtown Atlanta attracted nearly 78 million visitors in 2024, but it's not just visitors Cummings wants.
I think people have a lot of preconceived notions over the past decades about downtown. And my biggest ask is really for Metro Atlanta, our locals, to come rediscover downtown.
Millions of people are expected to walk through the neighborhood when Atlanta hosts 8 FIFA World Cup matches in 2026. A grand opening party, says David Cummings. And that's putting pressure on his team to meet their deadlines, completing renovations on older buildings and continuing neighborhood development in hopes to build South Downtown into a place that people want to spend time. Julian Virgin, WABE News.
You're listening to WABE's Week in Review with me, Alex Helmick. For more stories, videos, live streaming, events, calendars, and more, go check out the WABE app. New data centers built in Georgia will have to pay more for electricity to Georgia Power. As WABE's Emily Jones reported, it's a rule change meant to protect residents and smaller businesses from higher power bills.
Data centers, the facilities housing the physical infrastructure behind everything from email to AI, use an enormous amount of energy. So much that last year, Georgia Power got permission to build 3 new natural gas-powered turbines, largely to meet the industry's growing needs. Regulators and consumer advocates worried that Georgia residents and small businesses could end up covering some of that cost. So this month, state regulators approved new rules meant to prevent that. Jason Shaw chairs the Georgia Public Service Commission.
The number one goal for us is to protect the other ratepayers, primarily the residential and small business classes of ratepayers, to ensure there's not any cost shifts.
Under the new terms, Georgia Power will set a minimum monthly bill for new large customers to ensure they're the ones paying for any upgrades needed to meet their energy needs. The commission also extended contract terms to 15 years. So Shaw says data centers will keep paying even if they close or relocate.
What if these customers up and leave? That's what our fear is. And that's why you need longer term provisions to be able to basically lock them in for a longer period of time to recoup all of your cost.
It's too soon to tell if the changes will work, according to Liz Coyle of consumer advocacy group Georgia Watch. And since the rule only applies to Georgia Power, Coyle says state lawmakers need to look at the issue too.
I hope they're also thinking about, all right, what about the possibility of these large electricity users and water users locating outside of Georgia Power territory?
A special subcommittee formed in the State House plans to look at Georgia's energy and water resources for major economic development projects like data centers. Emily Jones, WABE News.
And finally today, as Georgia farmers adapt to a changing climate and changing customer taste, some are looking to expand their options. WABE's Marissa Mecki reported on researchers looking to see if the world's most expensive spice could be a new crop here in Georgia.
Sharma Acharya kneels down in a little patch of grass. During a few weeks in late fall, he and his colleagues watched this little spot like hawks. And in a large field, this patch of grass doesn't look like much. But in it, Acharya says there's something really special: saffron.
So you may not notice where the plant is unless and until you see the flowers.
Peeking out of the grass, a little purple flower.
It's one of the most expensive spice by weight.
He plucks out a tiny red string from the flower, the spice itself.
Because it's mostly labor intensive.
Farmers have to gently harvest the little red strings by hand, ideally the morning the flower blooms.
And that's one of the reasons why the price is so high.
A gram of those red threads can go for up to $200. It's used in all sorts of stuff from cooking to medical research. And Acharya says it doesn't take up a lot of space, and once you put it in the ground, it's low input. It doesn't need a ton of watering or weeding. Which is why Acharya is trying to see how well saffron grows in Georgia. He works with the Rodale Institute, an organization that researches regenerative organic agriculture at their farm in southern Fulton County. Rodale has a 2-year grant for this project. Acharya is not expecting giant saffron farms to pop up all around Georgia, but he says farmers could benefit by adding it as a horticultural side hustle.
Yeah, if farmers can grow saffron, if they can diversify their farm, it can be an alternative source of income.
And he says it's important because Georgia farms are mostly small, and that can make them vulnerable. Tim Coulong is a professor of horticulture at UGA. He says there's a lot of incentive for farmers to consider adding additional crops.
Let's say you have a complete failure in one crop. Well, if you're only growing 1 or 2 crops, you've got a problem.
But if that is spread out over a dozen crops, it can help mitigate some of that risk.
And he says with the storms and changing temperatures Georgia has experienced in recent years, it's more important than ever for farmers to build resilience into their business models, which is why many farmers turn to something called specialty crops, products outside of Georgia's main moneymakers like peanuts and cotton. Some specialty crops are pretty big in the state, like peaches and blueberries, and others are niche, like saffron.
So the scale of specialty crops, even though we use them every day in our lives, is just much smaller in terms of acres.
Long says the amount of labor involved in saffron makes it a real challenge, and that could be a turnoff for some farmers. Some other specialty crops have the same problem. Back in Chattahoochee Hills, Acharya says last fall was their second growing season and their last funded by the research grant. This year, they plan to put out their findings. But
even if our project is ending, we still continue with the work.
He and his team will keep farming saffron to learn more about how well it grows here. And he says they want to tackle their next question: just how profitable saffron could be for Georgia farmers. Marissa Mecki, WABE News.
That's all for the show this week. My thanks to the WABE News team for another round of great stories. Get even more at our website, wabe.org. I'm Alex Helmick. Thank you for supporting WABE and for listening to The Week in Review.